It happened in seconds. Seconds that stretched into a lifetime. One moment, my daughter was laughing, spinning in circles with her pigtails flying in the breeze, her little pink backpack bouncing on her back as she raced across the grass at the neighborhood park. The next, a sound shattered the air, sharp, terrifying, final, a gunshot. For half a second, I thought it was a firecracker. I wanted it to be a firecracker. But then I saw her stop mid-step, her little body jerking violently before she crumpled to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Blood bloomed on her shirt, deep, dark red, spreading fast across the pale fabric of her dress. Her mouth opened. No sound came out at first, and then came the scream. A scream no parent should ever hear. A scream from the pit of her stomach, raw and jagged, full of pain and fear. I flew to her side, screaming her name, barely able to hear my own voice over the pounding in my head. "Baby, stay with me, please stay with me, look at Daddy, look at me." My hands pressed against the wound in her stomach, warm, blood soaking through my fingers. Her tiny fingers clutched my wrist, shaking, her eyes wide with terror, lips trembling. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe. Behind us, chaos erupted, parents screaming, children crying, someone yelling, "Call 911, a kid's been shot." But I wasn't listening. I was staring at my little girl's face, willing her to stay alive. I looked up, trying to understand. Where it came from, who would do this? Why would anyone do this? And that's when I saw her. Karen, HOA president. The woman who once fined us for sidewalk chalk, who complained my daughter's laugh was too loud, who stood behind her fake smiles like a wall of poison. She stood a few yards away, her arm still half raised, the black handgun in her shaking, hands gleaming under the afternoon sun. Her eyes weren't wide with regret. They weren't wet with horror. They were cold, flat. She didn't run. She didn't speak. She just watched. My blood turned to ice. I didn't move toward her. I couldn't. My entire world was lying broken in my arms. 3 minutes later, the police arrived, blue and red lights flashing, officers shouting commands. They tackled her to the ground, handcuffed her as she finally began to cry, claiming it was an accident, claiming she didn't mean to, but she pulled the trigger. She stood there, aimed at a 5-year-old child, and pulled the trigger. And I will never forget what came next. She watched my little girl drop. There was a time, not so long ago, when life felt beautifully ordinary. Our mornings started with the sound of cereal clinking in a bowl and my 5-year-old daughter humming cartoon songs in her bunny pajamas. She was the kind of kid who saw joy in everything, even the cracks on the sidewalk, claiming they were dragon teeth guarding hidden treasure. Our backyard was her kingdom, a plastic slide, a bubble machine, and sidewalk chalk drawings that turned concrete into magic. My wife and I often stood by the kitchen window, watching her spin in circles under the afternoon sun, pink ribbons flying behind her like streamers of a parade that only she could see. We had moved into the neighborhood only 8 months before, choosing it for the schools, the clean parks, the quiet streets lined with identical mailboxes and trimmed hedges. It felt safe, suburban, predictable, our slice of peace. The HOA brochure had promised community harmony and a safe environment for families. We believed it. I believed it. And then there was Karen. We met her within the first week, blonde, pressed and tight-lipped, with a clipboard in one hand and a welcome to the neighborhood flyer in the other. She introduced herself as the HOA president with a voice that was equal parts silk and static, smiling just enough to feel staged. She didn't ask our daughter's name, didn't look at her twirling in the grass beside us. Instead, her eyes went to the length of our lawn, the slightly crooked mailbox, and the color of our front door. "We prefer earth tones in this part of the block," she had said with a polite chuckle that somehow sounded like a threat. My wife brushed it off. She said some people just needed to feel important. But from the beginning, there was something about Karen, Something under the surface, too still, too sharp, like glass hidden in a sandbox. Still, we tried. We showed up at the HOA potluck, brought homemade chili, complimented Karen's rose bushes. I even attended one of the community meetings where she spoke for 45 minutes about visual cohesion and the dangers of unsupervised chalk art. Everyone smiled and nodded, and I realized quickly this wasn't a community. This was a kingdom, and Karen was its self-appointed queen. Our daughter didn't care. She loved the neighborhood, especially the park around the corner, its bright blue slides, monkey bars, and tiny splash pad that hissed with water in the summer. Every day after school, she'd beg to go there. "Just 10 minutes, Daddy. I need to run." She'd race down the sidewalk, her little backpack bouncing, arms spread like wings. I loved watching her there. She made friends easily. She always included the shy kids. She called dandelions sun kisses and gave them away like gifts. Her world was pure, and for a while, I let myself believe that it would stay that way. Karen's complaints started subtly. A letter from the HOA about our daughter's scooter being left too close to the sidewalk. A printed warning about uncontained noise between 5-6 p.m. when she'd play outside with the neighborhood kids. Once, my daughter drew a smiling sun on our driveway in chalk, complete with a rainbow and stick figure family. The next morning, we found it hosed off, and a note taped to our door. "Please be mindful of visual disturbances." I started noticing Karen more, standing outside her house, arms folded, watching. Sometimes she'd pretend to water her roses, though the hose was never turned on. Once I caught her taking photos of our yard, and when I asked her why, she smiled and said, "Documentation. It's always good to stay organized. My wife told me to ignore her. She's harmless, just a bored lady with too much time." I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because the alternative, the idea that someone could hate a child for simply being a child, felt too ugly to imagine. Still, the tension grew. At a neighborhood cookout, Karen pulled my wife aside and said she was worried about our daughter's lack of boundaries. Apparently, she didn't like that our little girl had offered her son a flower. "What if it had bees?" she said, half joking. "What if she has allergies? We can't just let kids run wild." That night, my wife cried. Not because of the words themselves, but because they came wrapped in condescension, in a tone that made our daughter feel like a problem. That broke something in both of us. But through it all, our daughter stayed bright. She kept laughing, kept spinning in the sun, kept drawing her chalk masterpieces on the sidewalk. She loved harder than anyone I've ever known. She'd say things like, "The sky feels sleepy today," or, "Can I give the wind a hug?" Her heart was wide open to the world, and we believed, foolishly, fatally, that the world would be kind back. We never imagined that the real danger was standing right across the street, hiding behind roses and regulations, waiting for her moment to strike. Karen's irritation grew, slowly, like a crack in the foundation that you barely notice until the whole house starts to tilt. At first, it was manageable, petty even. A complaint about our daughter's tricycle being left on the edge of the lawn, a sternly worded letter about potential tripping hazards on shared walkways. My wife rolled her eyes and muttered that Karen needed a hobby, but I wasn't so sure. There was something behind those notes, something too exact, too eager. The letters came printed, not handwritten, typed in the same cold font as though pulled from a pre-written file she kept, just for us. And they always ended with a signature that didn't say sincerely or best wishes, but instead, "For the betterment of the community, HOA President Karen Dunwell." It didn't take long before the rest of the neighborhood caught on that we were being singled out, but no one spoke up. Not really, because Karen was the sort of woman who kept score, and in Pinewood Grove, no one wanted to be on the losing side. Then she started focusing on our daughter directly. Not us, not the lawn, her. A 5-year-old child with a stuffed unicorn backpack and pigtails. One day, our daughter left a tiny rubber ball outside, the kind you get from vending machines. It rolled into Karen's yard. My daughter ran over to grab it, like any child would, and before she could even reach it, Karen had come out, picked it up with a pair of tongs, and dropped it into a plastic bag like she was handling nuclear waste. "Your child is not allowed on my property," she snapped, voice cold enough to frost the air. "Next time, I'll report it as trespassing." My daughter looked at her with wide, confused eyes, then turned back to me as if asking what she had done wrong. I didn't have the words. I only had rage. We tried to let it go. We taught our daughter to stay away from Karen's side of the street, to play only in the backyard, to lower her voice even when laughing. But it didn't matter. Karen would still appear, arms folded across her chest, glaring from her porch like a hawk watching prey. "There's too much squealing," she said once during a Sunday afternoon when my daughter and two neighbor kids were playing tag. "Some of us like peace and quiet on weekends." Another time, she rang our doorbell at dusk to hand us a printed violation. Our daughter had allegedly been playing with sidewalk chalk too close to the street, which, according to Karen, created a visual distraction for drivers. It wasn't just the complaints. It was her presence, constant, watching, judging. My daughter began to notice. She'd ask, "Why does the flower lady look so mad all the time?" We didn't have a good answer. Then she said something that chilled me to my core. "I think she doesn't like me, Daddy." That night, I sat in silence, thinking about how a grown woman, an elected community figure, had made a child feel unwelcome in her own neighborhood. I thought about the fear in her voice, and about how often I'd seen Karen's blinds twitch when we walked past. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was obsession. I installed a security camera above our front door. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. And it didn't take long before the footage started to fill up with Karen's silhouette. Sometimes she'd walk by slowly at night, stop near the sidewalk, and just stand there. Once, she paused and looked directly at the camera. No expression, just stared for 15 full seconds before walking away. We even caught her snapping photos of our daughter while she played hopscotch, hiding her phone behind a copy of the HOA newsletter. When I confronted her, calmly, professionally, not as a father but as a man trying to de-escalate, she didn't deny it. "It's all about safety," she said coolly. "Some children don't understand boundaries, and you, of all people, should respect the rules, Sheriff." She always emphasized my job like it was a threat. Like she wanted me to know that she didn't fear my badge, that in her world, she was the authority. The final incident before everything collapsed came during a spring afternoon. My daughter had drawn a giant rainbow on the sidewalk in front of our house. She was so proud, beaming as she tugged my hand to show me each color. "I made it for the neighbors," she said, "so they feel happy when they walk their dogs." Minutes later, I heard the hiss of water. Karen stood there with a garden hose, washing it away without a word. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she asked softly. Karen looked at her, really looked at her, and said, "This isn't your canvas, little girl. This is a neighborhood, not a kindergarten." That was it. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, but Karen was the board. The other members either ignored it or claimed they hadn't seen the harassment. "She's strict, but she keeps the neighborhood in order," one said. Order? Is that what they called it? Watching a child like a threat? Targeting a family because their joy didn't match her image of perfection? We began keeping our daughter inside more, not out of punishment, but protection. She started drawing on paper instead of sidewalks, speaking in whispers instead of laughter. She would glance nervously out the window before asking if it was okay to go out. And we, as parents, were forced to live with the shame of letting fear dim our daughter's light, but we didn't know how dark it would get. Not yet. There's a fine line between controlling behavior and something far more dangerous, and with Karen, that line was starting to blur. Her obsession with rules had twisted into something colder, darker. This wasn't about sidewalk chalk anymore. It wasn't about curb appeal or HOA regulations. It was about control, about power, and worst of all, it had become personal. Our daughter had turned from a noisy inconvenience into a perceived threat, one that Karen seemed increasingly determined to eliminate. The first real warning came on a quiet Tuesday morning. I had the day off and was watering the backyard when I heard rustling by the side gate. I walked over, expecting a squirrel or maybe a neighbor's cat, only to find Karen standing just outside our fence holding her phone up, filming through the slats. She didn't even flinch when I called her name. She lowered her phone slowly, smiled faintly, and said, "Just making sure everything's safe back here. You can never be too careful with children running around." Then she walked away. No apology, no explanation. Just a steady, unnerving calm in her voice that sent a chill through me. I checked the footage from the front camera later that night and saw she had walked the full perimeter of our property twice before stopping to film, like she was casing the place. I filed another complaint with the HOA board, included the footage, but again, nothing happened. The board was either too scared of her or too numb to care. My wife wanted to call the police, but technically Karen hadn't broken any laws. Yet. But she was pushing boundaries, and every day she inched closer to crossing them. My daughter started having nightmares, waking up in tears, saying the lady with the staring eyes was in the window. We brushed it off as a child's imagination. But then, during a rare warm evening, when we let her play outside with chalk again, she froze mid-drawing and looked toward Karen's house. "She's watching," she whispered. I followed her gaze and saw the curtains shift. Just a flicker, but enough to confirm the fear wasn't imagined. The next incident crossed from creepy to criminal. Karen left a sealed envelope taped to our door. No name, just typed words. Inside was a 2-page incident report accusing our daughter of unregulated contact with neighbor property, reckless behavior involving wheeled toys, and creating emotional distress for adult residents. The last line shook me. This level of disruption cannot continue. Consider this a final warning. I took it to the local precinct, hoping to at least document it. The officer on duty said it wasn't threatening enough to press charges, but he agreed it was disturbing. "This isn't a woman enforcing rules," he said. "It's someone who thinks she's losing control." Then came the night I truly understood what we were dealing with. It was just after 11 p.m. I was locking up, walking through the living room when I heard a faint rustling outside. I peeked through the curtains and froze. Karen was standing at the edge of our yard, staring up at our house, motionless. No phone, no dog, no purpose. Just standing there, half in shadow, face tilted toward the upstairs window where my daughter slept. I stepped out, phone in hand, and she didn't flinch. I called out to her, my voice low but sharp. "Karen, what are you doing?" She blinked, like someone waking from a trance, and then turned with a soft, almost sad smile. "Some children bring chaos," she said, "but some neighborhoods don't need chaos." Then she walked away into the dark. That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did my wife. We sat in bed, lights on, listening for footsteps. Something was happening. Something terrible was building beneath the surface. The next day, I upgraded all our cameras, installed motion lights, and notified the police again. I even began logging every incident, dates, times, quotes. It felt like building a case, like tracking a suspect, except this wasn't some stranger on the street. It was a woman who lived across from us, who knew our routines, who had begun to speak about my child not as a person, but as a problem. And then came the worst moment yet, one that sealed my dread. I found a drawing in my daughter's backpack. She said she made it at school. It showed our house, a stick figure family, and across the street, a tall figure with scribbled black eyes and sharp red lines across the hands. "That's the angry lady," she said. "She's always watching from the flowers." My wife broke down crying right there. We knew this wasn't just about discomfort or neighborly tension. It had become a threat. My daughter was living in fear, and we were tiptoeing. In our own home, Karen had gone beyond control. She was circling something unthinkable, testing how far she could go without consequence, and we were running out of lines to hold. The alarms were sounding, but no one was listening. Not yet, but I was. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that begged you to believe the world was still good. The sun bathed the neighborhood park in gold, and kids ran wild in every direction, their laughter dancing through the air like music. My daughter was radiant. 5 years old, dressed in her favorite yellow dress with sunflower buttons, spinning in the grass near the swing set with her arms outstretched like a bird about to take flight. She had a plastic wand in her hand, blowing bubbles that shimmered like tiny rainbows. I remember the way she giggled when one landed on her nose. The way she called out to me, "Daddy, look! I caught a cloud!" I smiled. My wife sat beside me on the bench, resting her hand on my knee. For a moment, everything felt whole, safe. We didn't see her arrive. Karen. She came in quiet, like a shadow stretching across sunlight. I only noticed her when my daughter stopped mid-spin, her smile fading. I followed her gaze and saw Karen, standing at the edge of the playground, arms stiff, face pale, her eyes locked on my little girl like she was a wild animal tracking prey. Something in me tensed. I stood slowly, instinct rising in my chest. But I was still trying to believe this was just another uncomfortable moment, just another stare. Until she reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a black pistol. The world stopped moving. I remember shouting her name. I remember children screaming, parents gasping, some grabbing their kids, others frozen in place. But I didn't move fast enough. My legs felt like stone. And Karen, standing so eerily calm in the chaos, raised the gun with both hands. She didn't shout, didn't threaten. She just aimed. A single shot rang out, sharp, loud, final. My daughter stumbled. Her eyes blinked in confusion. She looked down at her stomach, where a small bloom of red began to spread across the yellow of her dress. And then she fell, folded onto the grass like a dropped doll. The scream that left my mouth didn't sound human. I ran, sprinted, my knees buckling as I reached her. Blood soaked my hands before I even touched her. Her tiny fingers twitched, her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Baby, stay with me," I cried, pressing my hands against the hole in her stomach. "Please, please, Daddy's here. Don't go. Stay awake. Stay awake." Her lips trembled. Her eyes stared straight into mine, full of terror and pain no child should ever know. My wife collapsed beside me, her sobs ripping through the air, her hands shaking as she tried to cradle our daughter's head. All around us, the park had descended into chaos. Parents screaming, kids crying, someone yelling, "Call 911! Call 911 now!" I heard the sound of feet running. I heard sirens in the distance, but all I could hear was my daughter's shallow, rattling breaths. I rocked her gently, my face soaked in tears, whispering every promise I could think of, that she would be okay, that we would go home, that I'd buy her ice cream, that she could sleep in our bed forever, that I'd give her 100 more bubble wands. Just please don't die! Her hands felt colder by the second. Karen just stood there, the gun still in her hand, her face blank, as if she hadn't just tried to erase a child from the world, as if she hadn't just committed a nightmare in broad daylight. Someone tackled her. A father, I think. Then the police arrived. Officers shouted, guns drawn, commands barked. They swarmed her, tore the weapon from her hands, shoved her to the ground. She didn't resist. She didn't even speak. She just sat there in the grass, staring at the blood on her palms like it surprised her, like it belonged to someone else. The officers rushed to us, taking over, wrapping my daughter in gauze, shouting medical codes into radios, rushing her onto a stretcher. They asked questions I couldn't answer. I was on my knees, covered in blood, my wife screaming, my daughter slipping further away with every breath. One of the EMTs looked up and said, "We need to go now." And that was it. I climbed in too, the ambulance beside her, holding her hand the entire way. I kept whispering, "Hold on, baby. Daddy's right here. I've got you. I promise I've got you." But inside, I was breaking. Nothing prepares you for the moment your child stops looking like a child and starts looking like a victim. Nothing prepares you for holding your baby in your arms and feeling her lifeblood drain through your fingers. Nothing prepares you for the rage, the cold, hollow fury that rises when you realize someone you saw at neighborhood potlucks, someone who handed out Halloween candy, just shot your daughter in the stomach. And there I was, holding my baby's lifeless body, screaming into the sky. The ambulance had barely disappeared down the road, my daughter fighting for her life inside, when I turned back to the scene and felt something inside me snap. Not grief. That had already swallowed me whole. What filled me now was something colder, more focused. The part of me that wore the uniform, the part that swore an oath, the part that knew how to hunt. I was no longer just a father drenched in his child's blood. I was the law, and I had just witnessed a crime so personal, so unspeakable, it rewrote the way I saw the world. I looked around at the chaos, the crying children, the horrified parents, the sirens, the gun on the grass, and then at Karen, sitting in handcuffs, flanked by 2 deputies. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes distant like she was trying to float away from what she'd done. She didn't ask about my daughter. She didn't cry. She didn't even look at me. And maybe that was what made the fury burn deeper. I identified myself to the officers on scene, not as a grieving father, but as a sheriff. I requested to be briefed fully. "We have the weapon," the responding officer said. "No serial filed off, registered to her. She claims it was self-defense." Self-defense, against a 5-year-old blowing bubbles. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. I walked up to her, slow, controlled, staring straight into the face of the woman who had terrorized my family and nearly ended my child's life. She wouldn't meet my gaze, just muttered, "She wouldn't stop. You don't understand. She wouldn't stop." I didn't answer her. There was no answer to madness. The evidence was piling up quickly. The gun was processed on site. No gloves, prints all over it, single round discharged. The ballistic team confirmed the bullet retrieved from my daughter matched the caliber. But that was just the beginning. When they searched her tote bag, they found a spiral-bound notebook, dog-eared, written in with dark blue ink in tense, cramped handwriting. It wasn't a diary, it was a manifesto. Page after page of unhinged rants about neighborhood corruption, outsiders disrupting peace, and a chilling number of mentions of my daughter by name. "The little one," she wrote on one page, "is the root of noise, chaos, and decay. Order cannot be restored until the source is removed." I read that line and felt bile rise in my throat. She had been planning this, watching, obsessing, escalating. This wasn't a moment of instability. This was a premeditated attack, written out in ink, rehearsed in her mind until she found the perfect day, the perfect shot. Body cam footage from the officers captured every second of her arrest. Karen didn't resist, but she kept repeating phrases like a looped recording. I warned them. "This is what happens. You should thank me." She wasn't just delusional. She was convinced she had done something right. The worst part was seeing the officers, seasoned and calm in any situation, glance at one, another as they read the notebook. Even they were shaken. I've seen killers. I've chased men with nothing left to lose, but I had never seen evil wrapped so tightly in politeness and rose perfume. I gave my full statement that night. Clear, factual, composed. I didn't want tears. I wanted a record. Every word was entered into the report like a brick in the case that would bury her. My wife, too distraught to speak, simply handed the detective the pictures of our daughter's chalk drawings, the ones Karen had destroyed, the ones our daughter had drawn of the angry lady across the street. They placed them in an evidence folder, along with the surveillance footage I'd submitted weeks ago showing Karen prowling near our house, filming through fences, and speaking to herself on the sidewalk at night. Karen was taken from the park in the back of a squad car, her neighbors watching in stunned silence. No one came to her defense. No one asked what really happened, because for the first time, the mask had cracked wide open and everyone saw what had been hiding underneath it all along. Her home was searched within hours under a judge-approved warrant. Inside, they found more. A corkboard covered in photos of us, my wife, my daughter, me. Candid shots from different angles, some from close range. They found more notes. Newspaper clippings about bad parenting, printouts of old crime reports from when I'd served on the force in another city. She had been researching me, studying my life, as if trying to justify what she was about to do. When I finally left the precinct, it was past midnight. I drove to the hospital in silence, my hands trembling on the wheel. My daughter was in surgery. The doctors said she had a chance, a real one. But the hours ahead would be long, and I would sit by her side every second of them. But I knew this. Karen would never be free again. The law would not protect her. It would crush her, slowly, legally, justly. I would make sure of it. And though it wouldn't undo what she had done, it would begin something else. Justice. Not revenge, not rage, just justice. And that was enough. For now. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and heartbreak. A place where time didn't pass but dragged, heavy and cold, stretching seconds into lifetimes. The double doors to the operating room had swallowed my daughter, and I was left outside, with blood-stained clothes, trembling hands, and a heart that had forgotten how to beat properly. My wife sat next to me, her arms wrapped around her chest like she was trying to hold herself together. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen, and her lips moved in silent prayer, again and again, whispering our daughter's name. I couldn't speak. I couldn't cry. I just stared at those doors, waiting for them to open, terrified of what might come through. Hours passed in a haze. Nurses came and went. One brought coffee we didn't drink. Another gently asked if we needed a counselor. But we didn't need words. We needed hope. We needed a miracle. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon emerged, his expression unreadable beneath his mask. He pulled it down slowly and looked us in the eyes. "She made it," he said. "It was close, but she's stable now." My knees gave out. My wife collapsed into sobs, her head buried in my chest, and for the first time that day, I let myself cry. They had removed the bullet from her abdomen, repaired the damage, stopped the internal bleeding. The surgeon explained that while the wound was serious, it had narrowly missed major organs. "There's going to be a long recovery," he said. "But she's a fighter." That word, fighter, stuck in my chest like a promise. She always had been. From the moment she was born, she was sunshine wrapped in determination. I had seen her learn to walk by falling 1,000 times and getting up 1,001. I had seen her stubbornly try to read a book upside down until she figured it out. And now I had seen her bleed, break, and still, somehow, survive. They moved her to the pediatric ICU. When we were finally allowed in, the sight of her nearly broke me all over again. Her tiny body lay beneath a web of wires and tubes. Machines beeped softly beside her. Her face was pale, her lips dry, her little hand wrapped in gauze with an IV snaking into it. But she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell. She was alive. I sat next to her bed and held her hand, careful not to disturb anything. My wife curled up in the corner chair, watching, whispering stories from her favorite books. For the next few days, we didn't leave her side. We took turns sleeping in short, fitful bursts. Nurses came in and out with medication and updates. They checked vitals, adjusted monitors, and smiled gently at us with the kind of compassion that only comes from people who see too much and care anyway. Recovery was slow and painful. She woke on the third day, eyes fluttering open like a fragile flower in winter. She couldn't speak, her throat raw from the breathing tube, but when she saw me, she smiled, just barely. And that smile was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You did it, baby. You're safe now." She reached up, weakly, and brushed my beard with her fingers. My wife cried silently in the background, hands clasped over her mouth as if she were afraid any sound might break the moment. The days turned into weeks. Physical therapy began. She had to relearn how to sit up, how to stand, how to take steps without shaking. She grew frustrated, sometimes weeping when her legs wouldn't cooperate. But we were there, every moment, encouraging, cheering, crying with her and for her. The hospital staff became like family. Her nurse, Lisa, brought stickers and glitter, pens. A volunteer painted butterflies on her cast. A therapy dog named Max curled up next to her bed during the hardest days. Bit by bit, the light returned to her eyes. Her laugh, faint but familiar, came back when someone brought her a new coloring book. She named every machine around her and gave them personalities. The heart monitor was beepy, the IV pole was drippy, and the blood pressure cuff was squeezy. She turned her hospital room into a kingdom, and once again, she ruled it with crayons and kindness. As for us, we healed too, slowly. The nightmares didn't stop right away. I'd wake in cold sweats, hearing the shot again and again, seeing her fall. My wife started therapy. So did I. Because surviving trauma isn't just about stitches and surgeries, it's about rebuilding the invisible parts. The parts that still flinch when you hear laughter too loud or see someone reach into a bag too quickly. But each day we got better, stronger, and our daughter, our brave, beautiful girl, led the way. One morning, as we walked slowly down the hospital hallway with her holding both our hands, she looked up and said, "Is the angry lady gone?" I knelt beside her and nodded. "She can't hurt you anymore," I said. "Ever again." She thought for a moment, then smiled and said, "Okay, let's go home." And just like that, we began to believe in peace again. Not the peace we had before, but something deeper, hard-won, earned, a peace that comes after the storm has tried to break you and failed. The courtroom was quiet in that heavy, suffocating way, like everyone knew the weight of what was about to be decided. It had been 6 months since that day in the park. 6 long months of hospital visits, therapy sessions, trauma, and trying to rebuild a sense of normal for our daughter. But now, we were here, sitting across from the woman who had tried to take her from us. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her hair tied back neatly, wearing the same kind of pastel blouse she always wore during HOA meetings, like she still believed this was all some misunderstanding. She had pleaded not guilty, claimed it was an accident, a moment of confusion, that she was mentally unwell and afraid. But the evidence was overwhelming. The weapon registered in her name, the notebook filled with delusions about our daughter, the surveillance footage, the witness testimony from neighbors who had finally come forward. I took the stand and told the jury everything. How Karen had targeted our family, how the signs had built up over time, how I had watched my 5-year-old bleed out in my arms. I tried to keep my voice steady, but when I described the moment my daughter smiled at me from the hospital bed, alive, the tears came. Across the courtroom, Karen didn't flinch. No remorse, no apology, just cold, empty eyes staring past me as though the truth didn't apply to her. The prosecutor read excerpts from her notebook aloud, words like, "remove the disruption, and they deserve silence." And each one felt like a nail hammered into her fate. My wife sat beside me, holding my hand so tightly it turned white. The jury took less than a day to deliberate. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, I held my breath and stared straight ahead. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. My heart thudded once, hard and final. Karen blinked but showed no emotion. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole, no plea bargain, no mercy. The gavel fell like thunder. It didn't undo what she had done. It didn't erase the pain, but it mattered. It was justice, not revenge, but accountability. My daughter would grow up knowing that the system didn't fail her, that evil could be named and punished. After the sentencing, we walked outside into the bright light of day, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without fear. Reporters asked questions, but we said nothing. This story didn't belong to the headlines. It belonged to the little girl with the sunflower dress who had survived a monster and still found a way to laugh. And as we drove away from the courthouse, our daughter in the back seat humming softly to herself, I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we both knew we had finally closed the door on the nightmare. Justice had come, and it had spoken, loud enough for the world to hear. We moved away quietly, without ceremony, without goodbyes. The house on Pinewood Grove, once meant to be our safe haven, had become a place of shadows, each corner echoing with memories too sharp to soften. We found a new home on the edge of a smaller town, surrounded by trees instead of fences, where the only rules came from nature and not from clipboards. Our daughter picked the room with the biggest window and the silliest wallpaper, bright, blue with little stars that glowed in the dark. She smiled more now, laughed more. Her legs had regained their strength, her voice its light. The park near our new home had no metal signs or strict regulations, just wide-open space, squeaky swings, and dandelions that she called wish fluff. I watched her run across the field on our first weekend there, arms stretched like before, and something in my chest finally loosened. We would always carry the scars, my wife, me, and especially our daughter. But scars are reminders, not prisons. They show we made it. We survived something meant to destroy us and came out stronger. Closer. Evil touched our lives, but it didn't win. It never will. Now, we wake up grateful, not just for safety, but for the sound of our daughter's feet on the floor, for her drawings taped to the fridge, for the moments we once took for granted. Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing joy in spite of what happened. We chose to keep living, to rebuild, to love louder than fear. And every time I hold her little hand in mine, every time I see her chase bubbles across a sunlit lawn, I remember why we fought so hard, why we endured. Because love, real love, is louder than gunshots, stronger than hate, and more permanent than pain. We didn't just survive, we healed. And that's the kind of ending no monster can ever take away. If this story moved you, if it made your heart ache, your hands clench, or reminded you how fragile safety really is, then don't let it end here. Comment justice below to show you stand for families, for truth, and for the kind of strength it takes to protect the ones we love. Tap the like button if you believe no child should ever suffer in silence and that monsters hiding behind rules and respectability must be exposed. And most importantly, subscribe to the HOA Stories, where we give voice to real families who face the unimaginable and live to tell it. These aren't just stories. They're warnings, lessons, and a call to stand up when others stay quiet. Every view, every comment, and every subscription helps us shine a light into the darkest corners of suburban life, where control, cruelty, and injustice often wear a smile. So if you've ever fought back, spoken out, or just believe in doing what's right no matter the cost, join us. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a movement. And together we can make sure stories like this are never ignored again. This is the HOA Stories, and we're just getting started.